think about the mental bandwidth that stressing about money takes up and how much that is then draining your creativity and your ability to do other things.
Hey there, I'm Goli Kalkaran, and this is Lessons from a Quitter, where we believe that it's never too late to start over. No matter how much time or money you've spent getting to where you are, if ultimately you are not happy, then it's time to get out. If you're feeling stuck and you feel like there's gotta be more, there's gotta be a way to feel fulfilled and excited about what you do, then this is the podcast for you. Each week, I will sit down with an inspiring guest who quit their professional career in order to forge their own path and create a life that they love. Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of Lessons from a Quitter. I am so excited to have you here. And you are in for a really big treat today. We have Erin Lowry from Broke Millenial, and it is so good. So much useful information. If why you haven't quit has anything to do with finances, then this is the episode for you. But before we jump in, I wanted to take a minute to talk again about the challenges that I'm running. I talked about it last week for the first time on the podcast that I've been doing these 30-day challenges. And I misspoke last week. I know I said that the June challenge had been underway for a week, but it had actually been underway for about 3 weeks at that point. Which means this week, we are in the last week of the June challenge and we are starting the challenge for July. So if you are interested in joining the growing number of people that are doing these challenges and making your rest of the year more actionable, more productive, and better in a lot of different ways, join us. You can join at quitterclub.com/July. And I will give all the information about what we're going to do and send prompts and send support for the month of July. Now, I will let you know what the challenge is going to be so you can see if you're interested, but we're going to do a joyful July challenge. And what that means is we are going to spend 30 days doing something that brings us joy every single day. Now, before you roll your eyes and say like, well, this isn't for me. I want to be more productive and set goals and try to figure out my side hustle or whatever. Hear me out. We spend so much of our life moving the goalposts and waiting for a time to be happy. So when I get this job, then I'll be happy. When I start making a side income to replace my income, then I'll be happy. Once I quit my job and go full-time freelance or start a new business or do the thing I love, then I'll be happy. And you already know how that story ends. That's not what makes you happy. And that's a big lesson that we need to learn over and over again. And so the reality of it is that we are all responsible for our happiness in this moment, in this day. And there have been numerous studies that have shown that people that do gratitude practices, that practice mindfulness, and by the way, what is mindfulness? It's being present to your moment. It's really taking in and being able to not worry about all the future and not have to constantly be hustling until you get the next thing, but really being present with what you have and enjoying that. Those people are more successful. They're more productive. They lean into joy more. They tend to be quote unquote luckier because they're looking for opportunities because they're not stuck on this hamster wheel. And so I ask you, just look at your own life. When was the last time that you just sat and enjoyed a cup of coffee or the food you were eating, like really enjoyed it, as opposed to just like stuffing it down your throat to get to the next thing? Or when was the last time you did something? Like for me, I've always been a dancer. I've always loved dancing. And I don't even know when the last time was that I just like turned on music and dance. We stop doing things that light us up because we have kids and we have jobs and we have to do all this other stuff. And it doesn't mean that you can't make 10 minutes in your day to do something that makes you happy and see the fundamental shift that happens in your mindset. And you will see like that it gives you permission to do other things that make you happy. And it starts teaching you how to do self-care and what things are important. And it really does fundamentally change a lot of things. So it's not all just about like, oh, I want to make myself happy or this seems kind of trivial. It is the fundamental mindset that you need in order to start going after that dream and start building up a business with the intention of kind of embodying that happiness now, not waiting to get there at a certain point. So since we're at the halfway mark of the year, and since July is the 1-year anniversary of the podcast, and it's my birthday month, we've decided that July is the best month to just really lean into joy. And we're starting it off with this challenge. So if you want to hear more about it and know more about the prompts that we're using and have more support, go to the Facebook group and join the Lessons from a Quitter group and sign up at quitterclub.com/July. I hope to see you all there. With that, let's jump into the incredible episode we have today with Erin Lowry. Now, I've mentioned this before, that the number one thing I get when I poll people on Instagram or when I ask in the Facebook group or when I'm talking to people is that people want to quit or start something new or go after their dream, but finances is what keeps them stuck. That could be because they have student loan debt. It could just be the fear of the insecurity of going freelance. And, those are real fears. I'm not discrediting them. But there are ways to deal with them. And so I am so excited that Erin has agreed to come on the show. She is the author of Broke Millenial, Stop Scraping By and Get Your Financial Life Together, and Broke Millenial Takes on Investing, a beginner's guide to leveling up your money. Her first book was named by MarketWatch as one of the best money books of 2017. She is refreshing and conversational, and her books are really just easy to digest and really easy to understand. I will wholeheartedly endorse them. I think everybody should get them. I thought I had my money stuff in order. And when I read them, I learned so many tips and things that I need to change. And I'm so grateful that I got both of them. She has appeared on CBS Sunday Morning, CNBC, Fox and Friends. She's written for Fast Company, Cosmopolitan, and Refinery 29. And she is a regular speaker all over the country. And this episode, she just really comes in with the practical knowledge that we all need to attack some of these issues that we're facing. So without further ado, let's jump in and talk to Erin. Hi, Erin. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on.
I'm so excited to have you on and talk about all the exciting things you're doing. Why don't you start by telling us how you started as the Broke Millenial, how you started this Broke Millenial blog, and what was the idea when you were just starting out?
Well, truthfully, and the reason there's actually a distinction, and I don't use and it's just Broke Millenial, is because it was always meant to be a generational moniker. And I started back 6 years ago. It was 2013. I was 23 at the time. And I felt like I think a lot of other people did. It was this kind of, it's either paycheck to paycheck or you're barely getting by. Maybe you're starting to save a little bit, but it doesn't even feel like anything's making a difference and adding up. You're competing with all these various factors. But there was one distinct difference, and that was I was raised in a family that talked about money a lot, but in really positive ways, in ways that were educational and taught me how to control my money. So even though I wasn't making very much of it, I did feel in control. And I quickly started to realize most of my friends didn't feel that way. So I wanted to create a place that I always, from the beginning, joked about I was going to trick people into learning about money because it was very narrative. I like to story tell, and I would use stories from my childhood. I always use stories of kind of struggling in New York City and trying to make it work and how the finances were working out, all the way to, hey, I'm just setting up my first 401k plan, and trying to use the storytelling narrative to weave in these, oh, great, now you know how to set up a 401k by the end of this post.
Very cool. And did you study finance? Did you have a background in wanting to coach or help other people in their finances?
Absolutely not, which was really the big part of this. I studied journalism and theater in college. I hated math all through school. In college, I think we were required to take one math class. I think I had to take stats. And since journalism and theater both were like, meh, it's fine. You don't need to be math oriented. That's the only math I had to do all 4 years of college was one semester of stats. So no, I was not coming from a background of, hey, I've learned all this stuff from having this crazy Wall Street career, right, working at a bank. Really, and part of my shtick, if you will, from the beginning was, if I can figure this out, you can figure this out.
I love that. But I think what a lot of people up against when they want to start that blog or put themselves out there is this, imposter syndrome of like, who am I? No one's going to listen to me. I don't have this degree or I don't have this background. Did you have any of that come up for you when you were deciding to put yourself out there as the Broke Millennial?
It didn't with the blog. It did with the book. Because the blog was always just meant, and first of all, the blog started originally as an anonymous blog. I wasn't sharing my name. I wasn't sharing anyone's names who was on it. My husband to this day gets referred to as Peach. He has his own little moniker. And he was then just my long distance boyfriend. Times have changed in 6 years. But I would say, for me, really, when I started Broke Millennial, the whole thing was just, here's my story. Here's how I'm making it work. Perhaps it can be of service to you. And from there, it started to expand. I also eventually went into working at a financial services startup. It was a fintech company, and the co-founders, I was employee number one, and the co-founders had between them 30 years in banking and investing. So I got to learn a lot from them. And I was also bringing some of that information in and looking at it, I would like to say, from more of a journalist angle. Now, when I got my first book deal, that's when the imposter syndrome heavily started to set in. And I started to have that rhetoric of what gives you the right. You were just a blogger doing this for fun on the side. Why do you think you're an authority to talk about any of this? You don't even know how to do math properly, like all of that kind of stuff.
So how did you push past that?
I would love to say it goes away. It doesn't. I actually got asked that on my book tour. A woman who is going to become an author herself actually asked me like, hey, I'm just curious, did you have imposter syndrome? And if you did, how did you get over it? And I went, I'm not over it. It just changes. And I think that that's what's always important to acknowledge. The version of imposter syndrome I had when my first book came on shelves compared to my second were totally different, but it was still a fear factor. And I think that a lot of it is putting support systems in place for yourself, whatever that means to you. For me, having a mastermind group is really helpful, and people who do similar work to myself that I can bounce ideas off of and kind of have checks with. And the other thing too is to recognize that you are going to make mistakes. Things are going to happen, and this isn't an apocalyptic situation. It's okay to just acknowledge and move on, and always be asking questions and looking to improve.
Yeah. Well, I love that. And I love that you're so forthright with it, because I think one of the biggest things too is just acknowledging that everybody has this. I think so often, like, we trick ourselves into thinking it's because like I lack the qualifications or I'm not good enough or whatever it is. It's just me, without realizing everybody feels like that. Everybody feels like, oh, who am I to do this or what, And so once you realize that, it kind of takes the sting out of it. Like, you can kind of, I don't know, hype yourself up in a bit to be like, no, I deserve to be here and I can do it just like anybody else.
It takes the sting out, but I think the other thing is it can determine how you present yourself in your work. In my second book, especially, I am not by any means an investing expert, and I wrote a book about investing. And I, in the book, in the introduction, talk about that. And I say, listen, I am here as your translator. I basically went out and did the research and figured out how to translate from these very smart people into a way that I feel is actually easy to digest and understand for a true beginner. Because I was once in your shoes and I remember it so clearly, and there wasn't this great resource available at my fingertips to learn about it. I say, I don't have a finance background. I didn't work on Wall Street. I haven't worked in a bank. Like, all the things that should qualify me, I haven't done. But here's why you still should listen to me. And I think if you sometimes approach it that way, for some people that reads as you're over explaining too much, this is uncomfortable. And for some people, it's like, yeah, I was curious. So thanks for sharing.
Plus, I think that like when we get out of our own way, a lot of times, like, people want to learn from someone like you as opposed to an expert, because it makes you feel like, okay, she understands because she's coming from the same position that I'm at, as opposed to somebody that a lot of times it's intimidating to talk to a financial advisor because you think like, hey, I don't even have enough money to kind of be in this room. And so I think a lot of times we stop ourselves and like if you're a couple of steps ahead, like you absolutely can help people that are in that same situation as you.
And I think that that's why the title is a bit divisive, using Broke Millennial. It's been interesting because a lot of people have said, well, I don't want to listen to somebody who's broke.
Right.
I'm not broke.
Right.
And my other point was, this wasn't ever about me. It's again, why I don't have the. It's always about what the generation has felt like and what a lot of people feel like. So it's kind of an anonymous avatar that first Broke Millennial goes and gets her life together. And then Broke Millennial learns how to take on investing. And then the next book, Broke Millennial, is going to learn how to talk about money with all the important people in his or her life.
Right.
And so it's more of this nebulous being that exists. It's not me specifically.
Yeah. That's funny because I never actually even thought of it like that. I really took it as like you're talking to broke millennials. And so you're helping people in that position, not you yourself. That's interesting. So clearly you've written 2 books. You're going to write a 3rd. This has obviously become like you're a speaker. You're featured all over the news and publications. It seems like when you started this blog, I mean, did you go into it thinking this was going to become your business?
No. And I think that that's been part of the secret of my success to a degree is it's a combination of luck and hard work. And part of the luck factor is I got in early. There are so many people writing about money these days. And that's actually a great thing. I love that there's more diversity of voices. But when I started 6 years ago, it wasn't very many different types of voices in this space. A lot of the people who were talking about money looked the same, came from similar backgrounds. I was one of the few people who was at the time single, living in a city, didn't have kids, was just from a totally different perspective compared to I'm married, living in a cheaper part of the country with 2.5 kids and my white picket fence. Like those are totally different relationships to money and conversations. And I think that part of it was coming from this very different perspective that helped early. And I think the narrative storytelling part helped a lot as well. But I never had any intention to make this a full-time job. I never thought that it would take off the way it did. I never focused on monetizing the website with like affiliate links or anything like that. It just was for fun. It was a hobby.
Interesting. And how long into it did it start monetizing? How long had you been doing it before it started becoming more of a business?
Well, the blog itself never really became a business, to be totally frank. The brand became a bigger thing and opened up opportunities. And I would say the thing that I started to use it for was just a portfolio piece to pitch myself for freelance writing opportunities. And that's really where I started to pivot because I was more interested in writing. I love the writing part. It was never like hey, I think this is an easy way to make money online. It was, no, I really love to write. And so if I wrote a blog piece that maybe got a lot of attention and an editor at a publication commented on it, I would then immediately message that editor and say, hey, are you looking for any content? I would love to write a piece for you. And that was one of the ways that I started to leverage up. And it also led me to the opportunity to work at that fintech startup because they found the blog and then asked me to come in and beta test a website and kind of all snowballed from there.
How cool. And I know you just mentioned that it has gotten a lot more crowded, the space. And I get this a lot. Obviously, that our audience are people that are unhappy in their careers and they're kind of looking to make a change. What I get a lot is, why would I start a blog? There's already millions of blogs out there. Or why would I start a podcast? There's already so many. So having been in there from when it was less crowded to more crowded now, do you still think there is space for people to enter whatever their passion is or what they're interested in? Or do you think they're right? Like there's just too many?
I think there's always space, but I also would encourage people to look at what they think the next big thing is going to be. So I wouldn't advocate for blogging. And frankly, if I had started just 3 years ago, it probably would have been a podcast. But now podcasts and vlogs and YouTube is like a little bit saturated. So what could possibly be next? Where could you go next? And I would definitely be trying to keep my eyes on like, what is the next iteration of these types of platforms? We are always going to need storytelling. We are always going to need learning. And if you can figure out how to break away and differentiate your voice, that's part of how you can rise to the top. But the other thing is, I see a lot of bloggers come in and get real excited for about 6 months and then burn out. Like blogging is like dog years at this point. So I'm decrepit, basically, being 6 years in. I know people who have their 10-year chip, but really, I think it depends on why you started in the first place. If your game plan was just to try to make an easy buck, first of all, it's not easy. All of these platforms are so much work. Second of all, If you're just trying to be driven by the money, you are going to flame out fast. My advice always to people who are interested in starting some version of their own brand or company is find something that genuinely interests you and that you feel like you can continue to grow and learn within that space, and that you're not just going to stagnate out because, gosh, it's going to be real boring after you've told 7 versions of the same type of story if you're not interested in continuing to learn and grow.
Absolutely. And that's what I love. I mean, when you said it kind of started out as just this side hobby and not really with the intention of starting it as a business, I think that's sort of the best way because it's something you're interested in. And like you said, a lot of this stuff, like you have to be in it for the long run or it's not really going to go anywhere. But I know a lot of times, I mean, I know there's obviously we're going to get into finances. And so you have to support your life. And that's what I think gets a lot of people stuck. Hey guys, we'll get back to the interview in 1 second. But seeing that you clearly have great taste in podcasts, I wanted to introduce you to another show that I think you'll love. The Startup Story podcast features courageous founders behind some of the most successful brands as they share their startup story. James McKinney dives deep with each guest about their early beginnings and those first steps that led them to create incredible companies. And you know it has to be a good podcast because he was kind enough to have me on the show. So if you wanted to hear all about how I started my photo booth company, or maybe how Clint Harp started his company before Chip and Joanna Gaines discovered him. Yeah, I was on the same podcast as Clint Harp from Fixer Upper. How cool is that? Make sure to check out Startup Story on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, Spotify, or anywhere you listen to podcasts. And now let's jump back into the interview. So I want to ask you some questions that I get a lot from my audience, and I have no business telling people what to do with finances. So I want to get your opinion. So a lot of our audience, like I said, are stuck in positions that they may not be the happiest in, but a lot of people are burdened with a ton of student loans. I find that they don't really know much about their loans, or they don't know, it's like they're paying off minimums. And so I'm just wondering, like, is there something you wish people knew about, like, if they want to attack student loan debt, or any advice? I know it's hard because it's so specific to each person and how much they have and stuff, but just something that maybe if you want to give like starting homework for somebody that really wants to get rid of their debt, to have freedom to kind of maybe switch careers, anything that you would say?
Yeah, you just actually hit it in the question. And that's that a lot of people don't really know the specifics. The very first thing you have to do, which I believe is the hardest step, is you have to face your numbers, because you can't make an actionable plan without that information. Yeah. So you have to track down every single loan that you have. And let's be honest, usually when it comes to student loans, it's like 5, 10, 15 different loans at various servicers, various interest rates and principal balances. But you have to find every single one. And I want you to create a spreadsheet where you list out the name of the servicer. So who owns the loan? Is it Sallie Mae? Is it Navient? Who is it? And then next to that, I want you to write the total balance that you owe, the principal sum. So $5,000, $10,000, however much the total loan still is. Next to that, I want you to have a column that has your monthly payment, how much you owe on each loan every single month, that minimum payment they're asking you for. And then I also want you to write down the interest rate, each and every single one of those loans. Now, one thing I'm going to point out is there's a huge difference between federal student loans and private student loans, because federal student loans, always the preference, if you're still in school and you're deciding how to finance your education, always opt for federal first if you have the choice. You have way more opportunity after you graduate to deal with the cost of those loans. First of all, the interest rates tend to be lower than private student loans. Second of all, you can consolidate them and put them on an income-driven repayment plan, so that monthly sum that you owe is prorated based on how much income you're earning. So let's say you're somebody who took on $70,000 in student loan debt, but you decided to go into a job situation that doesn't pay a ton. Maybe you're a teacher, maybe you're in social work, whatever it is. So it's really hard to make those monthly payments if they're not on an income-driven repayment plan. You also could have the opportunity to have your loans forgiven after a certain period of time, typically around 10 years, sometimes 20 to 25, depending on your payment plan, if they're federal. Now, if they're private, those suckers are awful. The interest rates are high. You do not have the same perks as you do with federal loans. So you want to get those things gone fast. And that's why I want you to write out the grid with all the information and also looking at the interest rates. Now, the trick is every single month, you have to make your minimum monthly payment on each and every single one of those loans. You don't have a choice. because this is the one area I always like to say, you do not want to ask for forgiveness rather than permission. If you know that you're going to have trouble coming up with a payment, don't wait until it's too late. Proactively call up your student loan servicer and have a conversation about it. This is only going to work once, but if you've always paid on time and you've run into a hard month, sometimes they will work with you, but not if you wait till later. You always have to be proactive. The other thing is, once you have this grid of information in front of you, now you can actually create an attack plan of how you're going to handle it. One, you can look at all the options for your federal student loans, which I extensively discussed this in my first book, Broke Millenial, Stop Scraping By and Get Your Financial Life Together. But there's also tons of information online. Just make sure it's a vetted source. The other thing is you want to look at that total sum that you have to pay every single month in student loans. And then you can decide, well, let's say that the total balance that I owe is $250 across all of my loans every month. But I know I can figure out a way to put $300 towards my loans every single month. So the extra $50, I don't want you to just randomly put it at one or the other. I want you to pick exactly which student loan you're putting that towards and aggressively attack it every single month. I always recommend highest interest rate first. This is known as debt avalanche. This is my personal preference. If you have a private student loan, attack that sucker first. Get that one gone. When my husband and I got married, we just annihilated his private student loans as fast as we possibly could because they are just terrible.
Right.
The other thing to keep in mind, because I know I'm throwing a lot at you all at once. I know sometimes it's easy to think like, I could only put an extra like $10 a month. What's the point? Here's the point. A girlfriend of mine put $10 extra on her student loan payment every single month, and it shaved a full year off of her repayment plan.
Oh my goodness.
Just a tiny bit more can actually do a lot. It can make a huge difference. So however much you can do above the minimum, do it. And the last thing about that, tell your student loan servicer prescriptively where you want that money to go. Because sometimes they do this tricky thing and apply it to future interest instead of your principal balance. So you need to write them a letter or an email or get on the phone and say, hey, I want you every month to take that extra $50 and put it towards the principal balance of insert the name of the loan here.
That is incredible advice. Thank you so much. I actually love it all, but I think the $10 additional monthly adding it, I think a lot of the audience may have a ton of student loan debts because it might be people that have gone to different graduate school programs. So it might be like hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so it starts feeling so overwhelming that it's like, well, it's not going to make a difference because I can only pay the minimum. So I'm just going to stick with that. But I think what people don't realize is how quickly that stuff can really compound. And because you're paying so much interest that like, if you can add an extra $50 or $100, which, most people can, if they actually budget and figure out in their month where they can save that, it'll help in the long run. But I think, when you're looking at like 30 years of repayment, it seems like what's the point? And so we tend not to do it.
I think the other thing too is you're right that a lot of times it's evaluating your budget, seeing if there's anything that you can reallocate, but also consider, is there any other way that you can either make more or when are you perhaps getting unexpected windfalls? And there's a variety of ways that those come. Everything from, it's so corny and cliche to say like grandma sends you birthday money and now it's 20 extra bucks that you can put towards your loans, to maybe you have an overtime opportunity at work. Maybe you pick up a side hustle like everybody likes to go on and on about. Right. But if you're doing something to make a little extra money, maybe you get a raise and instead of changing anything about your lifestyle, you take the extra money from the raise and start throwing it at the loans. Something to just make more as well is a key part of this conversation, as opposed to just where can I cut.
Right. Well, and it's a good point going back to like knowing your numbers is a lot of times when you're like kind of burying your head in the sand and you're just doing the minimum, you don't think about it. So maybe you're not thinking about how you can make a little bit extra, or when you get a windfall, you don't think about it. But when it's like top of the mind, when you are making a plan and you're looking at it, and let's say this month you add an extra $50, like you're thinking about it. So the next time that you get maybe a tax return that you weren't expecting, you're like, oh, hey, maybe I could put this $2,000 towards my loan or whatnot. And so I think it just goes back to kind of being really knowledgeable about what's going on in your financial situation.
It's true. And one of my favorite ones that a lot of people get, because if you get paid bi-weekly, there's those 2 months a year that you get those 3 paycheck months. That's essentially unexpected windfall. You don't necessarily need that for your the budget that you've set is used to just 2 paychecks in a period. So if you have that third paycheck, throw the whole sucker at your student loans.
That leads me to actually my next question. So let's say you want to aggressively pay off your loans, but you have a large amount of debt. I know you talk a lot about this in your book, and I think everybody should get your book. It's so good. You learn so much, and it's so actionable and understandable. But one of the things that you brought up that I think we should talk about is like, when you have this much debt, what should you be doing with respect to like saving money? Like if you get that extra paycheck, or if you get that, should you always be trying to put everything as quickly as possible towards your debt? Or should you also be still trying to save money for a rainy day?
Not only should you be saving, you should also be investing. So here's where it gets nuanced. Now, absolutely, yes, you need to be putting some money away because you need to have an emergency fund. Now, there are a variety of rules of thumbs about this magical emergency fund. So I'm going to go through a couple of different scenarios. And frankly, I think that you as an individual have to decide your risk tolerance and what you're just willing to do. And also know what your safety net is, because part of the conversation that doesn't often get had, but if you're in a situation financially where if things just really go sideways in your life, well, maybe you have parents or a sibling or an aunt and uncle who financially could step in and help you out short term in a pinch. A lot of people have that kind of a safety net, which might make them have a higher risk tolerance when it comes to paying off debt versus savings. But if you don't have that kind of a safety net, then you're probably going to need a little bit bigger of a buffer in your emergency fund. But let me go through the different kind of variations of that. First of all, like I said earlier, always make sure you're paying the minimums due on your student loans. Now, in addition to that, one of the rules of thumbs that you will hear constantly parroted in personal finance land is that you should have at least $1,000 in an emergency savings fund, because inevitably something is going to go wrong in life. Whether that's something for you personally, or whether it's a pet or a child, whatever it is, somebody's going to have something happen. Personally, if you have a pet or if you have a child, I up that number to 1,500 because those guys also have emergencies. Now, I would rather, instead of just focusing on that number, people actually sit down and figure out in a month, how much money do I need to have all of my base needs met? So pay rent or mortgage on my home. If you have a car that has a payment on it, making the payment as well as putting gas in the tank. Maybe you take public transportation, you need to buy a Metro card, that amount of money, how much it costs to have utilities paid, food on the table, cell phone bill, all the things that are essential to your monthly life. Write out that list, your bare minimum budget, and look at that number. You need at least 1 month's worth of bare minimum living expenses in an emergency savings fund. Now, for some people, maybe that's $1,000. I live in New York City. My rent is $2,700, just my rent. So $1,000 for me isn't going to help all that much if everything went sideways at once. So I need a heck of a lot more than that to even have 1 month of buffer. So I really like people to have that minimum 1 month of buffer in addition to continuing to pay off debt. Now, this is where it gets a little nuanced depending on your risk tolerance. If you're like, listen, I know I've got some safety nets. I have a month's worth of living expenses. If everything went wrong, I think I could find a way to make some more money within a month. So I feel okay just having a month. Once I hit that number, I'm going to put everything extra towards my student loans. That's your prerogative. For other people, it might be like, it needs to be once I get to 3 months, then I can aggressively be paying off my student loans. You have to be a little introspective on that. Now, the reason I also said investing in the beginning of this conversation, you have to be putting money into your retirement funds in tandem. Because you mentioned earlier, for some of us, it could take 30 years to pay off student loans. So if you wait 30 years to start investing for retirement into whether it's a 401k or an IRA, that's way too late.
Right.
You have to start earlier. So if you have the option, especially the one that's usually easiest is if you're traditionally employed, you get an employer match, put in at least enough to get the match. Maybe that's 4 or 5%. That's a great way to be investing for your future, focusing on your future in addition to kind of looking at all of these financial goals. If you are self-employed like myself, it's on you.
But you obviously still recommend like figuring it out with whatever is going to be best, whatever you can handle personally to still tuck away some in an IRA or some other retirement fund.
And one of the ways that I do this for myself, and anyone who's listening who's self-employed, this is a really easy way to kind of put yourself into a position to always be investing and saving for retirement. The reason I say investing, by the way, saving for retirement is the commonly used expression, and that's a bit of a misnomer because you are an investor. You are putting your money in the stock market. You are investing.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd rather use the language that's appropriate, which is investing for retirement. And also, if you don't, sometimes people just leave it sitting there in cash, and then 40 years down the road, it didn't grow as you expected.
Right.
So if you are self-employed, here's my strategy. Tweak it for your own self, however you see fit. Every single time I get paid, I put 45% of that paycheck into a savings account called Uncle Sam's Money. I nickname all of my accounts. That money is for my quarterly estimated taxes so that I'm never surprised. I always have money set aside to pay those. But 45% is a huge chunk of change. The reason I do that is I live in New York City, as I mentioned, so I have to pay city, state, and federal tax. Always want to have enough for all three of them. But in addition, I now have a lump sum left over that I can dump into my SEP IRA for retirement. So I consider that a forced savings plan for retirement. And then after I pay my quarterly estimated taxes, the leftover money gets put into my retirement fund.
That's an interesting method. I like that. I'm going to have to steal that. So your book, though, The Broke Millenial Takes on Investing, the latest book. Let's say somebody has, their student loans are under control. Maybe they have a little bit, but not a ton, and they're aggressively paying that off. And they have an emergency fund. They got their budget kind of under control, but they don't have a whole leftover, right? So it's like the quintessential broke millennial. They're making their life work, but they don't have a lot left over. So in this book, you talk a lot about how we should all start really thinking about investing. And I'm wondering, do you think people should be investing in addition to retirement investing, like 401ks and Roth IRAs? If you don't have a ton of money, should you still be looking at stocks?
If you don't have a ton of money, I think the first step is to set your goals. No matter actually where you are, the first step with investing is goal setting. And you need to decide what you're trying to achieve in the next year, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, all the way down the line, because that's really going to inform what you're going to do with your money. If maybe you have some short-term life events that could be coming up. Perhaps that's taking a big trip. Maybe it's getting married. Maybe it's down payment on a house. Maybe it's starting a family. Like all of those kind of cliched things, but they're cliche for a reason. They happen. And if that's all imminent in the next handful of years, I would not be putting risk on that money. I wouldn't be investing it. I would be putting it into a high yield savings account. Make sure your savings account is earning you at least 2% or more.
Wow.
Just throwing that out there. If you're getting 0.01%, that's trash. You need to move banks today. And also, in my opinion, your bank doesn't respect you if that's the interest rate they're giving you. But that's a whole different topic.
Actually, I'm glad you brought that up because that's like the biggest thing I learned from your book. And I would recommend people buy your book just for that, because honestly, I didn't know any of that. And I was like telling my husband yesterday, I was like, we got to change banks. So thank you.
Yeah. And it's funny because, books are in print. You can't update them super quickly. And the book cites 1% because at the time I wrote it, that was the really competitive rate. But now it's up to 2%. So keep that in mind, folks.
Oh, wow. So now I really got to switch quickly.
Yeah. So I would say definitely you have to write down your goals. Obviously, goals are flexible. Goals are going to change over time. You want to come back and check in on them at least once a year. But if you have things that are definitely short term, that's money that you're not putting risk on. But if you're in a situation where you're like, listen, this goal is 7 to 10 years away. I'd rather my money be earning a little bit more than it probably would be sitting in a savings account. I want to invest it. Yeah, it could make sense to be putting some of your money aside. But this also assumes that you have your emergency savings on lock. Also, that you have money set aside for any potential short-term financial plans. So you need to have hit those savings goals before you're investing in what we call taxable accounts. So those are accounts that are outside of retirement.
Got it. Okay. Now, switching a little bit of gears, let's say if people have their budget on lock right now and they're doing okay, but they want to quit their job. So a lot of people now, I think in this new internet age, there's, people are giving their hand at entrepreneurship and trying different things. And you see a lot of people wanting to take the risk to try out a dream. It's obviously scary, but some people do it as a side hustle, but I think some people really want to just like cut ties and go full force on something that they love. Do you have any advice on like how much they should try to save before they're doing something like that? Is there a rule of thumb of like how much bigger your emergency fund should be for that kind of a transition?
First thing I think you should do is pilot test your idea before you quit your job. Mm-hmm. So you should be doing this thing on the side of your day job to make sure that it's actually viable. Unless for some reason it's absolutely impossible for you to do that, which I would contest is pretty rare. Usually you have the option to try on the side. That way you're earning an income on it before you leap and go do it. So when you lose your day job income, there's still money that's already coming in and you've got clients and you're a little bit established. I wouldn't immediately quit and pivot. I would always test the viability first. Also, insurance.
Yeah.
That's the big reason that most of us stay at jobs longer than we may want to. So you also need to have thought the insurance side of it through. Where and how are you getting healthcare when you quit your job? Now, the sum of money, man, this also comes back to risk tolerance. So for some people, they might feel totally okay with a few months. I had a year's worth of money set aside outside of my retirement plan when I quit to go full-time self-employed, as I wanted to give myself that amount of runway to build things up. I also had clients. I had a steady amount of money coming in, but I just wanted a huge buffer. So if stuff went wrong, I didn't feel forced to give up on the dream and go back and earn money. I had some wiggle room, but that's a lot. The other thing that I did, I generally am a pretty risk-averse person, despite a lot of what I write about and what I do professionally. So what I did towards the end of working at a traditional employment situation, I started putting my entire day job paycheck into savings and just living off of my self-employed writer's income to see what it would feel like to have variable income. Obviously, very simulated because I still knew a paycheck was coming in the door. And then also putting that paycheck into my savings account helped really beef up the amount of money I was putting away.
I think that's a great strategy if you can make it work like that. I agree with you that I think you can test your ideas out on the side, and you should. I don't know how much people end up making before. A lot of times, depending on the job and the number of hours, sometimes you can't devote as much time. So I see the need for people that want to leave. But I think that actually 6 months to a year is a good amount to have saved, just because I do think that the stress of trying to make something work, if you only have 2 or 3 months saved up, it can lead to something that would eventually be successful and that you could make work. Like it might require you to go back and like quit doing this passion project because you didn't give yourself enough runway. So I totally agree with, having close to a year is probably ideal.
And I would also say that think about the mental bandwidth that stressing about money takes up and how much that is then draining your creativity and your ability to do other things.
Absolutely. I love that. So why don't you let us know, like, what is up next for the Broke Millennial? What is on the horizon?
Well, I am writing my 3rd book. It is due in November. So pretty much researching and writing that. And that one, as I mentioned a little earlier, is very much focused on relationships and money. But a lot of times when I say that, people think it's just about romance. But instead, I'm also talking about your relationship with your family, your friends, and even how to talk money with your coworkers and your colleagues. So it's kind of looking at different ways that money impacts our relationships in our lives.
So needed. Yeah. It's really interesting, like how much money affects so many aspects of our lives. And yet it's like taboo to talk about. And so many people are so scared or don't have the language to kind of have those conversations. So I know that's very needed.
I love that you mentioned language because I am going to have scripts for how to have certain conversations in the book.
I love that. And where can people find you if they want to follow along or learn more about what you're doing and get some more financial advice?
You can find me on Instagram at Broke Millenial Blog and on Twitter at Broke Millenial. The website is brokemillennial.com. And the books are available really wherever books are sold, as well as check out your local library. I always love when people are supporting their local library. And if they don't have it, you can also place a request for it.
Oh, wonderful. Well, I will link to all those in the show notes in case people can't write that down right now. Erin, thank you so much for joining me. This has been so helpful, and I really appreciate you taking the time.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Well, that was a ton of useful information. So make sure you buy Erin's books and follow along because she has so much good wisdom. But here are my 3 takeaways. 1, know thy numbers. Whether it's student loans, your emergency fund, 401k, or investing, you can't start focusing on your goals until you know your numbers. So get on it. 2, even a little bit extra helps. I know we like to think that if you can't pay off your loans super aggressively, then there's no point in going above the minimum. Or if you can't invest or save a ton, then what's the point? Well, there's a huge point. That little bit adds up quickly. And more importantly, you get into the habit of paying off more or saving more. So just start with a little bit. And 3, start something you love on the side. I love Erin's own example of starting Broke Millenial blog, as well as her advice for wanting to make a career change. Starting on the side, figuring out all the kinks and the problems, and proving that it's viable is the way to go. Start there, and then the transition is so much easier. I hope you guys liked this episode, and I will see you next week. Thank you so much for listening. I can't tell you how much it means to me. If you liked the podcast, please rate and review us on iTunes. It'll help other people find the show. If you want to connect or reach out, follow along on Instagram and Facebook at Lessons from a Quitter and on Twitter at Quitter Podcast. I would love to hear from you guys, and I'll see you on the next episode.